Hello, good morning. Hola, buenos dias. Is that correct? I think I kind of got it. Well, I stand before you with a lot of fear and trembling, mainly because it's such an august gathering of people, experts from all over Latin America. And I have three caveats before I start. The first is that this is the story of Singapore, and we do not presume to tell you what to do. We can't. The fact is that we have a different political context altogether. We've had a stable government for the last 30 years. Since independence, we're the same government. So that has allowed us to take a really long-term view of education policy, which is quite unlike some of the situations in this part of the world. And then the second thing really is that we are so small. And the complexities you face when I listened to the roundtable discussion yesterday, I must say that I'm just full of admiration, the courage that everybody has in order to tackle some really, really difficult issues that don't have simple or simplistic answers. My second caveat is, when I first saw the title, I nearly fell off my chair. I thought I was just going to share about Singapore's education journey. And then I saw innovative strategies for strengthening English in wider society. And the word innovation scares me, because it seems to suggest a silver bullet somehow. That's something that people have not tried before, and we've tried, and we've been just so innovative about this whole process. But the truth is, it's more blood and guts. It's just a lot of sweat and tears and just trying things and failing and trying again. So I'm not sure if I can give you any silver bullets for that at all. And of course, the third thing was that I was supposed to talk about wider society and not education. But I've had so many colleagues here who've asked me to speak about our education and what we've been doing in Singapore. So I'm going to do a little bit of detour and talk a little bit also about what happened in education. How did we get from third world to the first, as is sometimes said, and what happened in between? So I hope to be able to fill in some of the gaps for you, if that's okay with you. Is that right? Okay, thank you. First, I do want to say thank you for inviting me. I've never been to this part of the world, and having come, I've become a fan, and I hope to come again. Hopefully my family, so that they can be introduced to another part of the world that is so beautiful, with such warm people, and with so much heart and passion for what we all believe in, which is education. I'm going to give you some background information, followed by a description of what happened in our bilingual journey, how we were forced into it, how we are promoting and spreading English language in Singapore even now, the benefits it's brought us, challenges, as well as some conclusion. So in terms of background information, I don't know whether you know Singapore or where it is. We are not part of Japan. I'm not a part of China. I'm definitely not Taiwanese. I am a Singaporean. And if you look at the map here, it is in Northeast Asia and Southeast Asia. The map is very flattering to us because the dot has covered the whole of Singapore as well as half of Malaysia. And we are truly, truly only a dot. It's a tiny, tiny dot. You say that Chile is a very, very small country. Let me tell you that despite all our reclamation efforts, and we have made a lot of effort to try to get from the sea, more land, the current size of Singapore is 42 kilometers in length and 23 kilometers in breadth. It is tiny. It is tiny. And in this tiny dot, we fit in 5 million people. So you can just imagine the density that is living in this fast-paced city. So don't talk to me about small countries, because I know small. You have no idea what small is, right? But in terms of ethnic composition, you'll find that the Chinese race dominates. There are about, easily 74% of us, and then we have the Malays, 13%, Indians made up 9%, and then of course there's Eurasians, Asians of different origins, and also we have a lot of expatriate population. More and more we're finding South Americans coming to Singapore to open up restaurants, bars, but as well as to get involved in very serious work in science and technology. Like A-Star, for example, I think has a very close relationship with Brazil. So the current population, as I said, is 5.4 million people, all stuffed within that 23 kilometers by 42 kilometers. In terms of language, we have 4 official languages. So we do know about official languages. Of course, the first one, danger, keep out, you know that must be English, right? And then 危险，请避开. This one is Chinese. It's just Mandarin Chinese, not Cantonese, like Hong Kong, you know. So it's just Mandarin Chinese. And then, of course, we have Malay. Now, Malay, interestingly, is our national language. It is our national language. But in terms of official working language, it's English. But Malay is our national language. Our anthem is sung in Malay language as well. This is actually as a nod to our origins because, of course, you know, we were a part of Malaysia. And then, of course, Tamil. I think we have one colleague here who can speak Tamil, and maybe you can ask him how to pronounce this, but it's beyond me. So, you know, everywhere you go, you will see 4 official languages. But as far as language spoken by the population is concerned, increasingly we are finding that the proportion of English-speaking homes has risen to about 59% over the last 10 years. That's a lot, you know. I mean, it used to be that so many, like my parents didn't speak a word of English. But over the last 10 years, we've seen a rapid rise of people whose home language background is in English. But what kind of English? We'll talk about that later. Well, I say this next slide actually gives me a lot of, like, you know, heartburn. It sounds incredibly boastful, but it's not meant to be. Because, as I said, you know, when I come before you, I really come before you in a lot of humility. Yes, it's true that we have done very, very well in international benchmark tests. Here you show a series of results, right? Things like TIMSS, PEARLS, and PISA, which is going to have its results released on 3rd of December, right? I hope the ministers of education are not losing sleep over it. So, you know, for these results, we've done really well. Singapore achieved 1st and 2nd, respectively, in mathematics and science in the 2011 TIMSS study, and was placed 4th in the 2011 PEARLS study. And of course, Singapore's public schools is well known for maintaining high standards of teaching and learning. I want to say something though. Although we've done so well in these benchmark tests, frankly speaking, this is not what we chase after. We don't. What we really chase after is what's going to happen after school. Can our young people be employed? Can they compete in the global world? So these rankings are good. It gives us proxy indicators of how well we're doing, but they do not, in a way, deliver the results that we want to see, which is the child, and how the child grows up to become an upright person, somebody who can contribute to Singapore and to the world. And of course, Singapore has been cited as being a high-performing system. McKinsey report that I talked about yesterday, how the world's most improved school systems keep getting better. So in the report, it was stated very clearly that it was investment in education, especially in hiring high-quality teachers and providing continuous training for them is a key ingredient for success. Similarly, you know, in this book by Andy Hargreaves and Dennis Shirley, called The Global Fourth Way, Singapore was cited as a system that looked at quality when hiring teachers, like we do hire the top third of every cohort, and we identify and groom them for leadership. So the minute a teacher steps into school, we start trying to identify their talent, which track they should go on, which track they can go on, and how we can help the career grow and develop. And I'm a beneficiary of this, I must say. This is quite a little known, maybe it's not as little known, but still it continues to surprise me. So in terms of economy, we have no hinterland. I mean, just now your representative from Chile spoke about, you've got trees, you know, you've got resources. We have no trees. Well, a few. We have no resources apart from its people. But yet we have trade. We have sizable trade with other countries like ASEAN, Asia, but of course the United States and the EU 27 countries. You can look at the numbers. I mean, the numbers are quite amazing when you think of how small we are, right? And I'd like to say that we are also looking into Latin America. So I know the free trade agreement was signed with Chile in 2006, one of the first countries that signed a free trade agreement from South America with Singapore. And in Colombia this year, in July this year, the Singapore government and the Colombian government actually signed an investment guarantee agreement to promote greater investment flow and push for greater economic cooperation. It's so nice to know that the 10th Latin Asia Forum was held in Singapore. And this is just a sign that we are really interested in this part of the world, and we hope that we can boost ties, both trade as well as cultural ties. So I'm sure that you'll see more and more Singaporeans and delegations coming to this part of the world, as we hope that you will also come to our part of the world. So this is my sales pitch for Singapore. Make sure you spread the word around. The reason why I'm saying all these things is to show you the relevance of what I'm going to say to your topic, which is English for prosperity. I think we all accept in Singapore that the fact that we are able to get from third world to the first is partly because of the policy to make English the lingua franca of Singapore at the point of independence. So why did that happen and how did that happen? To be frank, Singapore had a very inauspicious beginning. We were ruled by the British for about 150 years. And this is an old map of Singapore. And it shows us being divided into ethnic enclaves. This is known as the Raffles Town Plan. So you have the Chinese area, you have the Malay area, you have the Indian area, and they shall never meet. So it was a policy of divide and rule at that time. So consequently, what happened was that because of this ethnic enclave, and even despite the Japanese occupation, what happened pre-independence is that we have vernacular schools, which means that we have schools which use Chinese as a medium of instruction, Malay, Tamil, etc. And then, of course, it is very, very difficult to form integrated schools because everybody is everywhere. That means the Malay children will never mix with the Chinese children and never mix with those who are Indians as well. So pre-independence, this was the scenario. So when Singapore became independent in 1965, it was a shock. Actually, we did not want to become independent. It's a strange story, right? We wanted to become independent from the British rule. But we did not want to become independent from Malaysia because we thought that we had no hinterland, we have nothing, no natural resources. How can we as a small, tiny island survive if we didn't have a hinterland that Malaya would offer us? Unfortunately, the talks fell through, and unceremoniously, Singapore was kicked out. I mean, really, it was kicked out and said, please get lost and be on your own kind of thing. So we suddenly found ourselves independent, and there was actually a very moving clip of our then Prime Minister, Mr. Lee Kuan Yew, really tearing at the point of announcement that we are independent. So instead of jubilation, it was actually a lot of fear. Now, because of that, right, there was no choice, okay, because the situation is so dire, the population was fragmented, no more Malaya to lean on. What can we do? We have to leapfrog the region, we've got to think of something else, right? So everything was kind of difficult, and therefore the government decided, let's go for bilingualism as the cornerstone of our education system. I want to talk about what Mr. Lee Kuan Yew said, The reason why I use English, first is to unite a fragmented nation, and the second is to leapfrog the region economically. I couldn't put the whole quote here, but I'm going to ask you to just indulge me for a while as I read the entire quote, because it is very clear as to why we had to use English. How would Singapore make a living? With barely 700 square meters of land, agriculture was out of the question. Trade and industry, well, only hope. But to attract investors here to set up their manufacturing plants, our people had to speak a language they could understand. That language had to be English. Since World War II ended, the English language had spread. It was the language of international diplomacy, and the language of science and technology, and the language of international finance and commerce. Singaporeans would have increased opportunities if they had a strong mastery of English. For political and economic reasons, English had to be a working language. This would give all races in Singapore a common language to communicate and work in. This is really the reason why we use English. And because there is political will behind it, you put your money where your mouth is, as the previous speaker said. So, students now, but I must say that internally it was not an easy process. Can you just imagine, this is in the 1960s. Everybody had shouted for independence. No country in the region would take on the language of the colonial masters as the lingua franca. It is a political stand, right? I mean, you've broken free of the colonial masters, so why would you want to do that? So it could have been political suicide. It could have been, right? Because the region was looking at Singapore and going why are you using English? And internally, even for the people, it was not an easy thing to accept, especially because of the Chinese schools. Now, the Chinese schools have traditionally been funded by philanthropists, rich Chinese businessmen, so that sense of pride and ownership is very, very strong. Now you suddenly say, look, I want you to use English as a medium of instruction as one subject in the school. Your teachers are not ready, in terms of ideology, in terms of belief system, it's very, very hard to get the principals as well as the sponsors of the school to have the buy-in. So what had to happen? So what had to happen really was the government engaging time and time again the leaders of these schools and to persuade them that English is the way to go, that they have to teach English. I must say that you asked me what did the government work on first. It was really first this policy that everybody had to learn English as a subject in the first instance. If you're a student in English school, you have to learn a mother tongue language as well. So that was actually a huge thing then. And despite all the struggles and all that, in the end, what prevailed was just reality. Because the fact is that once the government has decided that, look, I'm going to use English as the official working language, you cannot get a job in the government if you don't pass English. That creates a huge incentive for parents to want to send their children to English schools. And there was the example of the two universities as well. We used to have two universities. One, which was the English medium university, called Singapore University. Second was actually the Chinese university called Nanyang University. And when they graduated, the graduates had such great difference in the income and the salaries. Singapore University graduates could command a high salary, get into scholarships, go into like high positions, both in the public and private sectors. The graduates from Nanyang University, which was a very fine university, became bus drivers because they did not have the language, they did not have the access to English that would help them tap into the economy of Singapore. So, no, but these are like very harsh measures. I don't know if we can do it now. But in those days, it worked for us, that this draconian, rather single-minded move actually pushed everybody to move in that same direction. But even now, we know that we like English and we think that English has helped us. It is very clear to us that to keep the culture alive and the traditions alive, our children must be able to learn their mother tongue language as well. So whatever it is, even though English is a prominent position in our economy, continues to be so, but mother tongue language is so important. So that's why the quote here, you know your mother tongue to enable us to know what makes us what we are. And I think this is something that we still hold very firmly. In 1987, we finally turned the tide because English became the medium instructions in all schools. Basically, the Chinese schools capitulated. They realized that they had falling enrollment, and if they were to continue to run themselves as Chinese schools, nobody would enroll, or very few people would enroll. So that's why it's become a medium of instruction. What it means then is that, this is later on. What it means then is that every child, from the moment they enter school at grade 1, we teach in English. We teach in English, we actually make sure that they learn English. But in terms of teacher training, the first thing we tackled also was teacher training. Teachers were basically, I won't say frog march, it sounds terrible, but basically they were persuaded very strongly to attend classes in language proficiency center, in a language proficiency center set up in Singapore. They were also persuaded very, very strongly to attend grammar courses run by the British Council. Actually, 60 to 90 hours of grammar course for grammar top-up. So there was actually a lot of move to kind of like move the teachers' proficiency level, as well as to make sure that they can convert from teaching in Mandarin or Malay or Tamil into teaching in English. So there was all these things going on as well. Like I say, but you need a very strong central drive and central control, and people agreeing to the central control before this can happen. So that's why I'm not saying that the Singapore example is easy to follow. But in terms of policies to promote language use, English language use, I must say that it wasn't just education alone, because there were other policies. You know that we have a very interesting policy in Singapore, which is our housing policy. Most of us live in public housing. I would say that about 85–90% of us live in public housing. They're very decent public housing. They're not like a slum area or whatever it is. They're very, very well built high-rise buildings. But in order to make sure that there was mixing, I mean, yes, you could put the children all in the same school, you could use English as a medium of instruction, but if they go home to the Malay area, to the Chinese area, to the Tamil area, they would never mix. So we have a very strong, it's still enforced public housing policy, which has a race quota. So in every estate, you must have Chinese residents, Malay, and Indian residents. You have to have that. You can't buy if the quota is reached. So if there are like too many Chinese in one estate, right, then you have to sell it, the next person can sell it to someone of another race. So with this kind of like policy, it did promote integration, and it promoted, in a way, the use of English, because how else can you communicate with each other if you don't use a common language as well? So it's still the language that we use to communicate with each other as well. I would say that if just the education ministry were to drive the English move, it would fail. It has to be a whole of government effort. You already saw how our founding prime minister was so strong in pushing it. But the whole of government also got into the act. As I told you about civil service recruitment, if you don't have English, sorry, you can't be hired. And if you don't attain a certain level at that time, you can't be promoted. That's it. So there's a lot of incentive for people to want to learn English and to upgrade. And they also supported the effort by having adult education board and adult educational classes for these efforts as well. And of course, there were a lot of efforts made to re-incentivize, whether it's monetary or promotion or whatever it is, but it made sure that everybody wanted to do well in English. Once it becomes an important consideration for socioeconomic mobility, then you will know that, in a way, you've won the battle. You won the battle. You can argue and say that, that you lose other things, it's true. But in terms of the push for English, this is what made Singapore succeed. What about the media then? Well, I think that I don't know about this part of the world, but we are, even from the point of independence, there was broadcast and telecast in the 4 official languages. So that means we had access to English. We didn't have to subscribe, you didn't have to basically buy these services, they're all free to air channels. But once you have the English media coming in and you're able to watch TV, listen to the news in English, then there is that environment for you to listen to the language or even sometimes to practice the language. And I must say that English is really on its ascent. There is this great spread and popularity of Western, mainly American culture, as with all parts of the world. Of course, it's something that worries us because with the ascent of English, it does mean that mother tongue languages also suffer a little bit in terms of status as well. And now I think the role of English is very much entrenched with the internet. There's so much that you have to do. You can find out from the net by using English language. So I think that spread has really helped English to be very, very firmly entrenched in Singapore psyche. Are there benefits of bilingualism? Of course, there are. First, of course, is communication. All races can communicate with each other. I mean, that we have a common language that we can use to talk. And economic benefits, that time, mass employment became possible because the MNCs did come to Singapore. In Asia, we're still the only country that uses English as the working language. So they did come, and then we did manage to get employment. In terms of progression, you saw our GDP, you saw our trade figures, and we are now actually a banking and a financial hub, and the world's 14th largest trading nation, which is, again, very, very remarkable. And a lot of this we attribute to the use of English. But there's also another benefit, of course, of bilingualism. You know that we have Chinese and Tamil in our syllabuses, right? And the rising economies are China and India. So that has actually, I mean, in a way, it's been so fortuitous that in terms of bilingual policy and just knowing English and one other language, the mother tongue language, happens to be the languages of 2 very big rising economies in our region. So in a way, we've been singularly fortunate in that. Yes, so we hope that this will continue and people will continue to see that bilingualism, maybe, multilingualism is actually very, very important. And of course, I think even now workers are quite in demand because of the facility in the language. I talked about that. Now this sounds really rosy and so happy, right? Yeah, they live happily ever after, but we all know that in real life this does not happen. You do not live happily ever after. You're always living in slightly mild panic in a state of siege sometimes. Especially with a small country like Singapore. I mean, honestly, we are quite paranoid in a way because we know we are small and we know that we have to keep ahead and keep watching who is coming up. Even I was speaking to one of my colleagues from Uruguay, and she was saying, oh, great that Singapore has done so well in all the benchmark tests and all that. But we both agreed that once at the top, there's only one way to go. So we have to make sure that we are cycling really hard to at least stay there or go a little bit ahead, but hopefully not backwards. But we do have challenges facing English. My colleague from Brazil reminded me that, mastery is a problem. It can be a cognitive burden, but it's also an opportunity because it makes you more flexible. It actually helps you to think more, and you actually benefit immensely if you can have bilingual children, if you can have bilingual students. Nevertheless, as I've explained, it is a struggle and it's a mindset issue as well. Our linguistic environment is very complex, and our fear is that we have students who are not very good in English, but not very good in mother tongue languages. A bit of a half, but not full, So we are always concerned about that. And of course, what we try to do then is to revise our syllabuses to make sure that we help our students learn better, to emphasize communication, not just rote learning of languages, but the use of language, and to use it for communication purposes. So we've been thinking all the time about changes in teaching methods. So we have this method called Stella in a primary school, which has a lot of modeling of reading, writing together, and then revising the writing together. So we try to make sure that language becomes real to our students and is alive and something that is enjoyable and you can actually learn it. If you need to know more about any of our pedagogical approaches, I'll be happy to talk to you later on. Now, in terms of promotion of literacy in Singapore, is unabated. We've got this thing called Read Singapore. It's an annual campaign almost mounted by the National Library for us to all read, for parents to read their children, for children to read, for schools to introduce reading programs in school. Is very, very aggressive and very successful because they have all kinds of festivals, and together with that, they have the Singapore Writers Festival, they have the Readers Festival. So there's a lot of things going on at least once a year to help this reading culture come alive. We get the cab drivers to read as well. We have book clubs with cab drivers, with book clubs amongst teachers, nurses, social workers. We try to demystify reading and to say that reading is for everybody in every society. You don't need to be just educated or university graduate to read, but anybody can read. And we have the Kids Read program. Very excited about the Kids Read program because they are now going into the homes of low SES kids. Because some of our kids are from poorer homes and they don't have a rich learning environment. They don't have a rich book environment. So, and then if you tell the parents, please bring your child to the library, honestly, the effort, the cost of bringing the child to the library, they all add up and they're not so interested. Instead, now the libraries are going to those estates and those areas where they actually reach out to parents who are maybe on social welfare, and they give them book packages, they give them audiobooks, they try to encourage them to read with their children or to expose their children to reading as well. Then, of course, we have this Institute of Adult Learning. This is really to help parents who help grown-ups who have left the system, they didn't benefit from that big bilingual push, and they still want to learn and they want to improve. So we have the Institute of Adult Learning, which has many, many courses, and many of these are English courses. I was just talking to a colleague from there, and she was saying that they have this test, pre and post test, right? So they have a pre-test for these adult learners. They go and do the test online, and then whatever their mark is. And then they attend a course, and they do a post-test, and if they improve by a certain percentage, they get $100. So it's quite an incentive for them to want to do it, until they found out that some of them deliberately failed their pre-test. so that the process will be incredible, and you're going like, oh no, this is not the intended consequence. So for many of these promotion efforts, there are many unintended consequences that we always have to watch out for. Because we do want to promote reading, writing, and all that, but we also don't want people to cheat. Because we don't want to promote cheating, right? Yeah. So this one is interesting, I think, to many of my colleagues. They asked me about Singapore colloquial English or Singlish. Just now, your speaker talked about cool. What's cool? What's not cool? Maybe using English is not cool, whereas if you use Spanish, it's really cool. Well, similarly, we have a problem, because as English has stayed in Singapore for a number of years, we have evolved our local version of English. I'm not talking about having a local accent. We do not need our Singapore citizens to speak with an American accent or a British accent to get the stress patterns and intonation perfectly correct, but we do need them to be intelligible to the world outside of Singapore. But Singapore colloquial English is very, very interesting. I'm going to do a demonstration in a minute. Okay, so there are simple ones that you can understand. If you come to Singapore, right, and then you want to say, where are you going? And someone says to you, you go where? You can understand. You can more or less understand. But what you're something like, instead of watch what you say, they say it this way, and there's certain sort of emphasis and tone that they use, which is not very standard English. Why you say until like that? This is English. Why you say until like that? Why you like that, ah? Please lah, please lah. So there's a lot of variations. It's incomprehensible. You know, I mean, there are just many mixture of the languages. Many of these are actually translation from Chinese into English or dialect into some form of English. So we have words like kia su. Kia su means you're very, very scared to lose. Kia si means you're very scared to die. Kia bo means you're very scared of your wife. So there are just all these there are all these words that are, if you're not an insider, you don't understand what we are saying. But I'm afraid that this has got a really hip factor. I mean, it's caught on as a rather hip thing to say. If you spoke in English, I must say, I'm a bilingual user. I am a very fluent speaker of Singlish. I hope I'm a fluent speaker of English. But I like the language because there's something very emotive about it, I guess. You know, it's almost like code that I share with Singaporeans. But I know that if I were to speak with my friends even, and I spoke like what I'm speaking now, they'll say, why are you so like that? So proud, so proud. So which means like I'm being so like snobbish. Why do I speak like that, you know? Yeah, so I will have to revert to some sort of like lower register or select so that I'm accepted as part of my group, because I'm not proud, you see. Otherwise they'll say, so proud, so proud. Then I have to justify, why am I so proud? But can you just imagine in terms of the school kids? The language of the playground, the language outside the classroom, and sometimes the language inside the classroom is Singlish. Because why? Teachers want to build rapport with their students. And they say that, look, if I were to speak the Queen's English, which is not what we're after, but they will say that if I were to speak the Queen's English, how would my student relate to me? How would I be able to reach out to them? So right now, we have to change the teacher's mindset, we have to change the student's mindset. We are not saying get rid of Singlish, but we are saying give your students the best provision possible. They didn't come to school to learn to stay where they are. They come to school to be lifted, to be raised, to have an opportunity. And I'm so glad that in the 1960s, when I went to school, my teachers did not condescend to my level because they would have to speak to me in Cantonese. But instead, what they did was they held me to very high standards, to the high standards that they were taught. And they made me speak well, and they made me learn the language well. And this is all we're asking our teachers and our students to do. So that's why we're formed, and I'll tell you what we do later on. Yesterday, Francois was saying there's a Speak Mandarin campaign. Well, do you know we also have a Speak Good English movement? We have, yes, I'm a committee member of the Speak Good English movement, introduced in 1999. The target audience for this is actually the general public. Like this year, For example, this year, we reached out to the service industry, especially those in the food and beverage business. So we had coffee shop owners, what do you call it, taukes, with their shots and whatever it is, and then they come and then they speak about why it's so important for their staff to learn to speak good English. They don't speak in perfect sentences, but what they are signaling to the wider public is that it is important to speak well and be understood, because you need to serve people from different nations, and therefore you need to raise your standard of spoken English. So there is a lot of work going on with the Speak Good English movement. You should go to their Facebook page. It's very interesting. I mean, you Google Speak Good English Movement Singapore, you go to the Facebook page, they have so many good tips. I mean, very practical tips, like common mispronunciations or common wrong usages, and how you can make it right in a way. So we are not, as I've said, we do want to make sure that we continue to be understood outside of Singapore. That we're not just speaking in a sort of patois that only those of us who are insiders understand. We need our children to have both. That if, yes, you can speak Singlish, but make sure that you can code switch and make sure that you can use the right register for the appropriate moment. Yes, thank you very much. I've just been flagged. Okay, now, so what are we doing then? I think one of the things that we do is to preserve a high standard of English among educators. This is what Mr. Lee Kuan Yew said. I mean, we were so surprised. He's actually quite old now and pretty unwell, but he graced our launch. And this really signaled to us and to the rest of the teaching profession how important it is that he holds educators to these high standards of English, that we should role model and demonstrate a high standard of English in all that we do. So what we do is we work with teachers to improve the English language teaching, their pedagogy skills, and then also we have post-course support. Our master teachers go to the schools and support the teachers to make sure that they apply what they have learned during our courses. And of course, we also have this whole school approach to effective communication, where we persuade and work with principals to make sure that there's a culture of good English and effective communication in each classroom, in each subject area. Because what we don't want to see are the English language teachers having to bear the bulk of the burden, and the other teachers who teach in English saying that it's not my problem. I don't teach English. But they do, because the minute they open their mouths and instruct in English, they are teaching English. So this is the message that we're trying to get to them. Okay, last. Actually, the commitment is very strong. Honestly, if you ask me what is a singular factor that's different from other systems, I guess it's government support. It's huge political will to make sure it happens, right? And also, it's in a way, it's a success begets success, because once the population kind of understands where we're going and how this has helped us to succeed, so there is a lot of buy-in and there's a sort of traction for it as well. But as we move forward, we are pushing for effective communication as a critical 21st century skills, and we'll make sure that we continue to improve the language outcomes in our students. So that is all I have. Muchas gracias. Thank you so much for your attention.